exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow. Do you know who that man is over there?
That guy in the overalls?
Yeah, he's famous. It's Buck Nelson. Buck Nelson. He's one of the early UFO contactees, and he says he went for a ride in a flying saucer to the moon, Mars, and Venus.
Well, if that's Buck Nelson, isn't that the dog then that was given to him by the king from, what was it, Mars, Venus? I can't remember.
Well, yeah, but people think, well, he's a farmer there, and he wears coveralls, and he made the whole thing up. But I've seen photos that he's taken over his place in Arkansas, and the dog may be his friend Mo from Mars. He even gave me a couple of hairs in exchange for a small donation.
I remember that. Didn't Gray Barker also sell some of those hairs for a while?
Well, it's the hair of the dog. That's all I know. Well, this is incredible. I haven't thought of Buck Nelson in a long time. Actually, he was one of my favorites. I mean, I can't say that I buy the story, but it's pretty wild. But he was one of the few, along with Howard Menger, Tim, were one of the few East Coast contactees. And every year there in Arkansas on his farm, he had a UFO conference, a kind of homespun type of thing, and put out benches that people sat on and had a little speaker stand. And I've seen the photographs on the on the internet and all. And I even have a copy somewhere here of his little book that I understand has been reprinted. My Trip to Mars, Moon, and Venus. Very interesting. One of the early contactee stories. But we're going to hear more about that tonight, aren't we, Tim?
Well, I hope so. Hey, Tim, I've got an interesting little story for you here, real quick. Okay, last week we had our guest who were talking about alleged phone calls from the dead. Well, when we finished up last week's program, and it took me a little while to get everything shut down, get my notes in order and everything. And so when I left my office, my television was still turned on, and it was on a network called MeTV. And just as I came out of the office, a Twilight Zone episode started. And funny enough, it was the episode where the old lady is getting phone calls from her dead fiance. So I know you like a little synchronicity story. So that's
I like it with my cereal every morning. For sure.
Yeah.
Well,
so I didn't even know that the Twilight Zone was being shown that night. So it's just I was amused by that.
It's still a great show. In fact, I met Rod Starling. It's a kind of an intimate story, and I wrote it up in the book we did on the Matrix of Philip K. Dick and the Synchronicities of Tim Beckley. That big old 450-page volume. And speaking of volumes, you know what I have in my hand here, Tim?
What's that?
I have a copy of a book that you just worked on. And I was going to say, I guess what book that is, but you would have a hard time since you've worked on dozens and dozens of books that we've published. But this one just came out a couple of days ago. It's called Nikola Tesla Journey to Mars Update, exposing the existence of the secret space program. with Sean Castile and Commander X. But you're one of the main authors of the book. It's a strange book. I mean, because according to this, Tim, we've been on Mars for quite a while.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I mean, I first, believe it or not, I first heard this from, of all people, J. Allen Hynek, who he was in Dayton, Ohio one time when I was working there, giving a little talk at the Air Force Museum. And I interviewed him for the television station that I worked at. And afterwards, he proceeded to tell me about how there had been rumors going around for years that Nikola Tesla, of all people, had been responsible for building airships in the late 19th and early 20th century. So that's can't prove it, but the research that I did on it, I mean, I came up with some pretty interesting stories about that the whole scenario.
Well, there you go. So hey, let's get on with the conversation of the evening here. What are we going to be discussing tonight?
Well, tonight we've got two fantastic guests. We have John E.L. Tenney and our old friend Steve Ward. Now, John is a well-recognized and highly sought-after investigator of UFO, paranormal, occult phenomena, and he's been actively involved in the field of conspiratorial, occult, and paranormal research for almost 3 decades. It's estimated that over the past 28 years, more than 85,000 people have attended one of John's signature weird lectures. Now, John's column and articles have been printed in magazines, newspapers worldwide, and he has lectured to numerous people and private schools and organizations. Now, he's the author of over a dozen books, and John has been interviewed extensively on radio and television. And aside from his lectures and due to his extended time involved in occult research, he has acted as a consultant for numerous companies, including NBC, A&E, Fox, Sci-Fi, the Detroit Free Press, and Huffington Post. And let's not forget the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Now, he's also worked on numerous television shows, including Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings. I loved Sightings. That was a great program. Very Scary Stories, Paranormal State, Ghost Stalkers, and Paranormal Lockdown. And aside from his time investigating unusual phenomena, John is also an accompanied painter, musician, and humorist. Now, as well, tonight we have Steve Ward, who has been on the show a couple of times now, so it's always great to have Steve back with us. Now, Steve was fascinated by the unexplained for over half a century. There were 2 events that had a major influence on Steve and set a course for his future path. Now, Steve grew up in Michigan, so the March 1966 UFO flap occurred virtually in his backyard. The best, as he says, is however was yet to come. The following November, a winged humanoid chased 2 couples down a lonely country road near Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the legend of Mothman was born. And so, in a way, Steve would be chasing the Mothman the rest of his life. So, since 2006, Steve has been involved in the Mothman Festival, both behind the scenes and as a tour guide in the TNT area where the Mothman was first seen. And I think that the Mothman Festival is coming up later this month, so we'll definitely have to get Steve to talk about it. So, John, Steve, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Thanks for having us.
Hey,
thanks for having us.
I'm really interested here in the Buck Nelson story. Now, I understand, John, that you recently reprinted the book.
Yeah, I was doing a deep dive. I'm from Detroit too. Steve and I are both born in Michigan, and my whole life I've always been fascinated with the Michigan aspects of high strangeness and weirdness. And so this year I was trying to put something together in my mind, get all my files, and I have, file cabinets too, like all of us crazy researchers do, full of stuff. And I kept running across a lot of the Detroit Flying Saucer Club stuff that was formed.
My goodness. Yeah. I know they had quite a large organization out there. They were pretty much, I think, contactee oriented, but they had like George Adamski and I guess a lot of in those days the contactees were touring the country. Now they always accused the contactees of making money off of their stories, but the truth of the matter is they stayed in the homes of friends for the most part and took the Greyhound bus. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like they were making a lot of. It wasn't like they were making a lot of cash on that. And admission to their lectures were what, $1, if you were lucky. Yeah. Anyway, so go ahead, tell us about the group. Yeah.
So I was putting I found a bunch of their newsletters, about a half dozen, and so I started thinking about republishing them just to get them back out into circulation, and so people could see what it was like at the time in the 50s. The Reeves had just written My Flying Saucer Pilgrimage book, and
wonderful book, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was like, these newsletters, which back then was called the Vimana. So I republished those, and I kept running across notes inside of my notes talking about when they brought Buck Nelson here. And so I looked online to see if I could find a copy of Buck's book, and there were some copies, but there was one copy that had been published, and somebody rewrote it so that it sounded correct, so it wasn't in that kind of country folksy writing that Buck had originally written it in. And there were some people that had republished it without the illustrations and drawings. And I said, listen, I'm just going to put one out that was the way that Buck had it, so that people can look at it and remember that time and kind of see how not only strange and silly Buck's story was, but I mean, I think that when you hold the book in your hand and kind of read through how honest he seems to be portraying his story, it just gives you a really good glimpse into what it was like in that time.
Yeah, he was also says that he was visited by the Men in Black. I believe he was on his way to lecture somewhere on the Greyhound bus, and he had some sort of confrontation with the MIBs, and he ended up going back home.
Yeah, he was coming from Washington, D.C. He was going back to his home, and he stopped just out in Indiana. And he said that he was approached by some MIBs, and they told him not to tell his story anymore. And then when he got home, he was frightened. And even when he was in his home, a car pulled up outside, and he said there were two men in a car, and this was another MIB encounter once he got back home. And a man came in his house and told him, I hope you got the message in Indiana. Don't keep telling your story.
Well, tell us about the Martian dog.
So so Buck loved his dog.
Listen, you and me are among a handful of people that know this trash. Come on.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So he loved his dog, and the first time that he went on one of his trips to outer space, he didn't get to take his dog, but the second time that he went on a trip, not only did he get to take his dog, but there was a giant Venusian dog that the extraterrestrials or the visitors had brought with them. And so Buck's dog and the extraterrestrials' dog took a bath in a lake, and then they got on the flying saucer, and they all went across the solar system together. And
what were they tripping? What were they tripping out there in Arkansas?
Wildwood weed.
What's really funny? You mentioned it in earlier, and I don't know how many people know if you were joking or not, but they did used to sell the hair of the dog that went to Venus.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, now there's DNA proof if there ever was one.
Right?
Yeah. But I think that they, in fact, Buck had a photo of the dog, and they both look pretty much the same, except the Martian doggy took the picture real close up, and so it made the dog look like he was much larger than he really was, and I think he parted his hair, on the other side or something like that, just to give it a little a twist, But
yeah, they do look very similar.
Yeah, he had to be probably one of the most folksy of the contactees. I mean, he wore coveralls.
Yeah,
and. He had his convention there in the Ozarks, and had benches that were made, out of plywood and a little stand. And I think he even had a carnival in the back. Didn't they bring a carnival in? And you could ride. Yeah, you could. It was almost like it's almost like I was there.
There's some really great photos from a photographer in Florida who, in the '60s, went to one of Buck's last conventions and took some photos, and those are online. And I recently was talking to him right before I published the book. I was asking about release for pictures and stuff like that, but I didn't want to publish pictures that hadn't been published in the original book. But while I was talking to that photographer, he told me, one of the stories that Buck told in his later years was he had gone to a convention and told his story, and when he came home, this giant oak tree in front of his house was gone. That the aliens came and took an oak tree. I mean, they pulled it out by the roots.
He beat Billy Meyer to it.
Well, it's funny because this photographer, they couldn't believe this story Buck was telling them, on top of all the other stories Buck was telling them, that the aliens had stole this giant tree from in front of Buck's property. So they went, after the convention was over, this photographer and his friend, who, were in their early 20s at the time, they drove down to the only gas station in town, and some kids came up and they were like, "Hey, were you just at Buck's?" And they were like, "Yeah." And these kids started laughing. They said, "He was out of town for a couple of weeks. We cut down the tree in front of his house. We dug the stump out and we covered it up with sod. We really probably freaked him out." And so even though these photographers, they were like, "We're not even going to tell Buck that this was all a prank pulled on him by these kids because he's got enough problems as it is."
Poor Buck. But how did he? What did he die from? I mean, was there anything, strange about his passing? Or
nope. He lived, and he was already a, somewhat older guy. And once he reported his story too, you probably remember. I'm sure the listeners don't. Like you said, there's only a handful of us that remember this stuff. But as soon as he published his book, he got kicked off of his pension because they said he was insane. Yeah. So
that's a reason to get away. You ought to get double the money.
One of the things that I found really fascinating when I was republishing the book and looking at the original copies, because even Buck put out two different versions, but in both versions of the book, Buck talks about when he was first taken on the ship, he felt like he wanted to sleep a lot because where he was on the ship, and he couldn't tell where in space he was, but all he knew was that there was a clock that showed that there was a sunrise and a sunset, and it was happening. There were 17, I'm trying to think of how this goes, 17 sunrises and 17 sunsets a day where he was at. And for some reason that stuck in my mind when I was reading all this stuff. And so I went and I looked back on the internet, and what I found out that was really kind of interesting is that is actually what happens on the International Space Station.
Wow.
Is that the sun rises and sets there's 17 sunrises and 17 sunsets every day when you're in outer space on the space station.
Well, now, okay.
Oh, that's interesting.
You and I sit here and we get a chuckle out of this, and we take it all with a grain of the hair of the dog. I mean, do you think he had anything, going? I mean, any part of a reality seep into his experience?
I mean, that's what we're all interested in, right? Is where does this reality stop and start? Was he getting precognitive flashes of something, in the dream state, or was he imagining something? Was he being, messed around with by the government, who might have been messing around with people? Because, you have that era of nuts and bolts spaceships that have exhaust pipes and fumes coming out the back, and they don't seem to be high technology extraterrestrial vehicles. So, where is that blend of someone just making something up and someone maybe tapping into, that larger kind of cosmic mind that we may or may all not be in contact with?
Very strange, but I'm sure you've got a lot of stories to tell. I can see that. And we've already been talking for 20 minutes, and we still don't know too much we don't know anything about your background, except that you tend to believe in crazy stories. But that's okay. That's acceptable on this program because it is exploring the bizarre. Is that right, Tim?
That's right. That's right. We're here to look into the world of the weird.
I'll give you a really brief recap just of where I come from. I started off as just like a punk rock kid in Detroit in the early 80s, and I never liked people telling me how to think and what I could think about, and fascinated by the stories of the Monroe Monster, Bigfoot in the 60s in Michigan, and the 66 flap that Steve knows so much about. And all of the fascinating, ships and planes that disappear in the Great Lakes, that got me fascinated. And I met a guy who was a conspiracy researcher. He was a history teacher at one of the colleges here at Wayne State. And he took me under his wing as a gopher. I got coffee for him and wrote letters for him. And I started going to what were then called metaphysical conventions and meeting a lot of, I say this very genuinely and with revere, a lot of you old timers. So, getting to meet people like Hans Holzer and Ed and Lorraine Warren and John Keel and Richard Hall and just people from that era really started expanding and opening my mind. And, by the time I was in college, I was going to school to be a history teacher. I thought I'd just specialize in folklore. And I got this call from NBC asking if I wanted to be a researcher for this show called Unsolved Mysteries. And it all kind of took off from there.
Son of a gun, you had a real job.
I did.
Yeah.
Unsolved Mysteries at first, though. I mean, they dealt mostly with like murder mysteries and things like that.
Yeah, after they ran out of people being killed, which you'd think would never happen, is when they moved into the Queen Mary and Lizzie Borden and UFO sightings and abductions, and that's kind of where I came in.
I watch Unsolved Mysteries every morning. There must be like 3 hours on some station on the on TV and the cable, and I always manage to watch an hour worth of the program. And even though I've probably seen each of them, I always have missed something. In fact, one of my favorite abduction stories was actually dramatized on there. I think it was on there. Carl Higdon. I may be wrong. It could have been on In Search of, but his wife just recently came out with a little book that they put together about his experiences of being abducted out there in Wyoming. He was the hunter that went out one day and tried to shoot at the elk, and the bullet came out in slow motion. And he went on board the craft where the pilot looked like a punk rocker.
Yeah, that was
this
that was like in Wyoming, right? In like the early 70s.
Yeah. Well, he's still around, and I have been trying like hell to get him on the program. He's not in great health, but I do speak to his wife, and they came out with this little booklet retelling the story, and he still swears to this day that it really happened to him. And unlike Buck Nelson, we love you, Buck. He had more than a hair of the dog going, for him. He's got the bullet that was twisted inside out, and some other, evidence that indicates he was removed from planet Earth.
All right, Tim. Well, I need to interrupt you here because we are coming up to our first break of the show. So when we come back, we'll bring Steve into the conversation. Yes. So stay tuned. You're listening to Exploring the Bizarre on KCOR. We'll be right back.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And we're back with Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. We've been talking with John Tenney. So, Tim, now let's bring Steve Ward into the conversation. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
It's always great to have you on the show. Now, during the break, you and John were talking about you both were at a conference in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan last week.
Yeah, the Michigan Paracon. I don't know how many years they've done it now, but it's gets really they hold it up in one of the casinos up there, and they get a really, really good turnout. And they get a lot of the big names in the paranormal and so forth. And I'm going to have to admit that I did go see some of the speakers, but I played hooky a good part of the time and did a lot of schmoozing. It's these places. It's a lot of fun to go around and talk to people and exchange ideas, and it's really a good time.
So now, were you giving a lecture? Were you there?
Oh no. I'll be giving a few coming up this month. In fact, during the break, we were talking a little bit about John Keel. And at the Mothman Festival, I will be talking about John Keel.
The Mothman Festival. Now, That sounds familiar. Yeah. Have we talked about this before?
Yes. In fact, the first time I was on Exploring the Bizarre was 2015 in the fall.
My.
And I was on with Nick Redfern talking about one of his more recent books. And the Claudia Cunningham, the MIB lady, was on.
Oh,
So
yeah.
We were talking about
you do a hayride.
Yes, that's. I mean, they have speakers there. They have the vendors. They have speakers all day, Saturday and Sunday. Of course, it's a great place. It's in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, deep in the Ohio Valley. It's along the Ohio River. There's the scenery. There's the history, and but also on Saturday night is the night that there's three of us, the only tour guides in the TNT area at the only Mothman festival in the world, and we guide people in. It's one of them's like a traditional hayride. It even has bales of hay on it. The others actually have seats on it, which I appreciate. But we go into the dreaded TNT area where the Mothman was supposedly seen that first time. The two couples that were chased down Route 62 on November 15th, 1966, and it's set up a little bit like a Halloween hayride. I mean, there's not a lot of scares on there because the area itself, if you've ever been there, is incredibly creepy in the daytime, and at night it just gets amped up. But it's a lot of fun. The people on board are really responsive. We have the first thing that happens is you're stopped by men in black. There's three guys dressed up like men in black. Some years they chase you in on a golf cart with a siren, and they've got the megaphone, warning you not to go into the area and so forth. And of course, there's a pretty good chance there's going to be a flyover of the Mothman at some point with red glowing eyes and a really cool scream.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And I thought I was serious about the subject.
So now, how long has this been taking place now?
This will be the 17th festival. It started out with very humble beginnings. And the last couple of years, they've drawn in about 10,000 people. This is all open air. The only thing you pay for is a few bucks for the hayride. Everything else is free, all the talks and everything. So, and they've extended it down the street, so it's not quite so crowded. I mean, they have all the vendors. They have a life-size Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. They have one of those, what do they call them? Those pole line things that the kids can swing down. And so they have all that stuff too. So if you're, if the families come in and not everybody's interested in the paranormal, there's other stuff to do. But the speakers usually have a booth or a table set up. They're very accessible. This is where, in 2006 was my first one. And back in 1976, I attended the MUFON Symposium in Ann Arbor, which was 10 years after the swamp gas fiasco. And Dr. J. Allen Hynek was there. So, and I got to meet a lot of people, but it was a long, dry period between 1976 and 2006. And like John Tenney just said, the only thing I attended in between, I think, were some of these psychic fairs, and that was the only way that I could. In fact, I met Laura Mundo, one of the
Laura Marxer originally. Yep.
Right. She was a Detroit area contactee.
Yep.
Very much.
She got herself in the middle of Dr. Hynek's swamp gas press conference. There's a photo of Hynek holding up a photograph of one of the Adamski scout ships, pretending like he thinks it's legit or something, because I guess she handed it to him or something, and he's pointing to it, and that's the photograph you usually see of Hynek at the press conference.
So it was great. When I was just my wife was just laughing because I had this grin on my face from ear to ear, and that's where I met Jeff Wamsley, who was one of the co-founders of the festival, and he's written a couple of books on the Mothman where he went back and re-interviewed people. They're very good supplements to the original book, The Mothman Prophecies. And I met that year I met Rosemary Ellen Guiley. and so many people over the years. So, and then last year Jeff asked me to speak, and he asked me to come back again this year. So it's quite an honor, and I'm also going to be kind of emceeing. It looks like I'll be introducing a lot of the speakers. So, and also I go down early to help run all the cables and wires for the Mothman, and help John and Tim Frick, who are the geniuses behind the low tech operation to fly the Mothman. It's what you know. People go back there in the with the old acid plant, this creepy place, and you see they've got this low tech operation set up, which works beautifully. And so that's part of the show. If you're on the inside, you get to go back there and watch John and Tim fly the Mothman.
So now, what's your lecture going to be this year?
Yeah, I've been actually. I had a different thing in mind, but Jeff Wamsley asked me, and Jeff knew John, if I would talk about John Keel, and I never got a chance to meet John, but it's been quite a challenge. I mean, condensing John Keel down into about 50 minutes. Fortunately, a friend of the show, Brett Rains, he has been writing a book on John Keel. And I think the working title is something like The Man, Myths, and Mysteries. John Keel, The Man, Myths, and Mysteries. And Rosemary Ellen Guiley, her publishing house is publishing the book. They gave me permission to look at the PDF of what he's done so far. So that's some of my source material there, which has been really helpful. And I think he's hoping to get it out this fall sometime, but I know he's still doing interviews and so forth. There's also
Brent is a great researcher. He's really top notch. I mean, he manages to get interviews that nobody else gets. You know, I mean, really, he's got his own podcast. He's right on the money.
Well, I was very impressed with some of the things he came up with and some of the things he uncovered. Some things I knew about, but other things I didn't. So. I also have used Doug Skinner, has the johnkeel.com website with a wealth of. Doug Skinner was one of the guys that helped John toward the end when he was getting kind of old and needed some assistance. But he has taken all this material, and every month he puts some out on this website. It's phenomenal. So
and our friend Ratso, Larry Sloman, was also very good friends with John.
So, and fortunately, there was a time when Keel was being forgotten. I remember when Art Bell had him on. He didn't know anything about the Mothman. He had never really heard anything about the Mothman. I thought, I was the guy that bought the Mothman Prophecies in hardcover with the dust jacket off the shelf. I knew it was coming out. I was probably the first, maybe one of the only ones to buy it. But I was there.
I had a copy of that as well, Steve. So you weren't the only one.
but also, then a few years later, a pretty well-known talk show host, nobody here, but there was some event coming up in Pennsylvania that they thought John Keel was going to be at, and he said, there's going to be this UFO guy there, but I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. And I thought, you don't know John Keel's name, but his books at that point had not been reprinted, and he was this great mind, and that is still making waves today, was being forgotten. But all that's changed now. I mean, just about everything he's written, including his obscure articles and magazines, are available. Wow. All his major books. We've got Brent Rains coming out with this great book, and it's finally turning around. And you have people like Nick Redfern. And in one of his more recent books, Black Diary, he makes a reference to John Keel, and he says, John Keel was ahead of his time, and wherever he is now, he still is probably ahead of his time. Rosemary Ellen Guiley said the same thing in the introduction to Brent Rains' book. And I was even at a, who David Politis is, the missing 411 guy. Okay. Well, last fall I was at a conference that he spoke at, and he and Stan Gordon are talking back and forth. They had their tables next to each other, and you talk about a fascinating conversation. And at one point, David Politis stops and he says, John Keel, he was ahead of his time. And it's so good to see the tide change. And, that he was such a major influence on me when I read Trojan Horse. That he was a paradigm destroyer. I was very happy with E.T. and little silver-suited aliens jumping out of egg-shaped craft, and Keel really messed that up. I came kicking and screaming.
One of the first books of Keel's that I ever read, and I bought this at a used bookstore before I had read anything else by Keel, and that was his book Jadoo.
Oh.
And that was always one of my favorite books. And then I started reading. I ran across like Our Haunted Planet and some of his other earlier ones. And then I got to looking, and I'm like, John Keel. Oh, that's the same guy who wrote Jadoo.
Yeah.
And then I was just hooked on the guy. And then like you said, then Mothman Prophecies came out. And it's just like, oh my God.
Can I tell you a couple of things about Jadoo?
Please do.
Apparently, it's just been reprinted recently. And when they originally published it, they didn't want his romance to be in there with this young lady that he was involved with. So that's all been restored. And it makes him kind of it gives you the whole picture of John Keel, because he did have this great romance with this German girl, I believe. So that's been restored. And then there are some great lectures that have been available anyway that John Keel gave to the, the Fort Fest that you were about back in the 90s, 80s and 90s?
Yeah, down in Baltimore, three corners
yes.
or four corners or somebody's cornered. I went down there a couple of times with him. I met everybody that was involved in that. A great little show, but they never quite got it too well organized. I mean, they never had 800 people that I know of. One time they set it up at the university, and they had all these booths and all these speakers, and a handful of people showed up. I don't know.
Well, fortunately,
that's ufology. Yeah.
Well, some of these are not good quality, but some of these were preserved on tape. But it's
how many towns now have festivals? It's out of control.
They all have festivals now.
I went to the one in Pine Bush last year. That was my trip away, and of course they invited me to speak down in Point Pleasant, but I have some problem getting there. I haven't driven in a few years, and it's quite a haul. And anyway, I'd love to make it down there. Of course, I went down with Jim Mosley and Gray Barker and Barbara Hudson after the Silver Bridge, collapsed, which of course is part of the story.
I met a survivor that went down on the Silver Bridge and survived the ordeal. I don't know if we want to tell the story now or later, but last December was 50 years since the bridge collapsed. And the last few years, they've had a remembrance ceremony there in Point Pleasant. Well, we heard that there was this guy that had survived the collapse, and he was there somewhere. I met him the next day. Bill Edmondson, met him down at the River Museum, and he told us a story about how he survived. He was driving a semi from the Point Pleasant side to the West Virginia to the Ohio side. And he's hauling material to Detroit to be for a tire company. And the bridge just started, in the film where Richard Gere is running around and has all kinds of time to warn people. Mm-hmm. Well, the actual collapse took 30 to 40 seconds. And so the bridge started swaying back and forth. He was holding onto the steering wheel to try to stay in place. Everything let loose. He hit the water with such force that he was thrown through the window, right arm first, and still has a pin in his arm to this day. There was good news and bad news. He went to the bottom, but he was free of the truck, and the current started to pull him up. The bad news was the force was so bad, his pants were pulled down, which almost sounds funny, but 1960s pant cuffs, they were still dragging behind him. There was debris still falling from the bridge, caught him and pulled him back under. So he finally was able to break free, came to the surface. There was this big mass of material that he was hauling, floating on the surface. His right arm's no good. It's December 15th. It's 20 degrees. The water's freezing. It's just after 5 o'clock. The sun's almost down. He puts his left arm through the slit of this material to stay afloat. A tugboat captain sees him, and they pull him up out of the water just moments before he would have died of hypothermia. So I have never, I mean, I've heard many stories of survival and read them, but I have never heard a story told one-on-one about survival like this. And he was a great guy. He was there with the support of his family, and he wanted to come there he was from North Carolina. He wanted to come there to show his support of the 46 people that died that night on the bridge.
Mm-hmm. It makes you wonder if the whole Mothman, story and mythology would be with us today if it hadn't been for the Silver Bridge collapse. It's almost like the catalyst that kind of sent that story over.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, because there have been other areas like this, flap areas, where a lot of weird things happen that didn't get this kind of attention. But they, even if there's no direct connection, it's connected in space and time. People are never going to separate them.
Well, and that's the thing too, right? I mean, that's what we all think about too. I mean, what if you have these types of, kind of retro synchronicities where the more we think about it and explore it in the future, how do we know we're not changing it and making it even weirder than it was when it originally happened in the past? I mean, we might be directly affecting the past by what we're doing in the future.
Ooh, I like that. Well, and that's you say that though, but I mean that is something that has been discussed earnestly with quantum physicists. Is that the past is being affected by the future? So I mean, and it's very similar to what Childhood's End. That Arthur C. Clarke wrote about, where the coming of the aliens was so traumatic that it actually sent like a psychic pulse through into the past. To influence that demonic devil imagery. Well, unfortunately, we are coming up to the top of the hour break. So let's go ahead, Tim, and go to that. So when we come back, we will continue our conversation with John Tenney and Steve Ward, and we'll talk about more weird stuff on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned.
Is this where I get to play the harmonica?
Yes.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right. Welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. Interesting conversation taking place during the break there, Tim.
we ought to do like Gene Steinberg does and sell the outtakes. For a couple of bucks a week, you can get us a talking off the cuff.
There you go. Just for an extra $20 a week.
There you go. And we do take donations. The donation button is there on the KCOR site, and we'd be happy to take your money and run. And we'll tell you more fanciful stories of Buck Nelson, and even take you, if you send enough, we'll take you for a ride on a flying saucer to Venus. How about that?
That's right. Bring your dog.
There you go, and your cat, and anything. Well, have there ever been any other space animal? Well, I think doesn't Billy Meyer claim to have an animal or a dog or something like that?
I don't remember if he had a dog or not, but I do. I mean, Billy ended up taking pictures of dinosaurs, right?
Oh, dinosaurs, right. Yeah. And one of Dean Martin's backup singers, I think, got a picture or something too. Yeah, but speaking of animals, it was actually because of a flying cat or a cat with wings that Mothman came to a light. I don't know whether I guess the story would have got some attention, but Keel was down in West Virginia. He wrote a syndicated column, the title of which I don't remember offhand, but it appeared in 40 newspapers around the country at the time. And he went down to investigate this story of a cat with wings that had been found in a tree, and then there was somebody else who claimed that they owned the cat, and the cat came to New York to him. It's in one of the books. It's a kind of a convoluted story, but
Thomas the cat, I think.
Thomas the cat.
Thomas the cat. Yeah.
But if it wasn't for Thomas the cat, there'd be no Mothman.
Well, there's another weird connection. I was going through the Pennine UFO mystery by Jenny Randalls, and there was a kind of a classic UFO abduction. The guy's name, I'm trying to think of his name right now, Alan Godfrey. Anyway, it's classic. He gets his unscheduled medical exam with no deductible and no copay, and he's got the little short dudes in there. But at one point, he's under hypnosis, and they're asking him to describe what's going on inside the room. And he pauses and he says, "There's a bloody dog down here." And he says, "Well, I think it's a dog. It looks horrible, but it looks just like a dog." So there's this black dog, kind of the classic black shuck from British folklore. And these black dogs do show up occasionally, but it's in a classic UFO case where you get two motifs.
I think we just had him on the program, didn't we, Tim?
Yeah, a couple of months ago.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Alan Godfrey, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. He found the body of a Adamski on top of the coal pile. Isn't that the same for the police officer?
Not George Adamski, but
right,
another guy by the name of Adamski. Yes, that's Alan Godfrey.
There you go. We've had some great guests on this program. Nobody has the guests that we have on. I mean, I hate to toot my own horn, but I have the opportunity to listen to some of these other programs, and they're boring. Most of the guys come on, and usually maybe young adults, and they sit around talking for 2 hours amongst themselves, thinking that they're cheerfully funny, and usually they're not, and they pretend to be high, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're not pretending on it, high or drunk or something. We come on with a bit of decorum, Tim. Would you say? I mean,
that's right, and guaranteed we're not funny.
Oh, well. I thought we were the Abbott and Costello of the paranormal.
Yeah, more like the Ritz brothers.
I think
actually. What? Yeah.
I was going to say. You know what I think?
What's his name? Leo Sprinkle. His sons had a UFO comedy routine, because I remember they performed or gave their little routine out there in University of Wyoming many years ago when I was there.
Go on, John. You were trying to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that, sure, I think I might be the youngest one of this group currently on. I'm 47. But it seems like now, because of the internet, we at some point in our careers or lives in doing this weird stuff, we all went out and looked for monsters and UFOs and ghosts and weird stuff and tried to do weird stuff. Like physically went out and did it. And it seems like now there's a generation that the majority of people, they might go to a ghost hunt, or they might go and look for a UFO once, but they don't ever really get into the mud of it, right?
Right.
John, yeah.
John, did you ever drive down to Monroe to look for the Bigfoot down there? A buddy of mine, I did years ago. Of course, go ahead.
I was going to say, I did a lecture about 3 or 4 years ago, and I talked about the Monroe monster, the big Bigfoot that supposedly pulled Christine Van Acker out of her car and gave her a black eye. And after I finished that lecture, this gentleman came up to me and he told me, he said, if you want to find out about the Monroe monster, I'll have you talk to my brother-in-law. He was the Monroe monster. He had been dating Christine Van Acker, and he was trying to scare her, and she freaked out, and he accidentally blackened her eye, and then he was afraid to tell anybody that he had done it. So he went and ran around. And that story about the Monroe monster was supposedly wearing a woman's fur coat.
Yeah.
And this guy said that's exactly what he was doing. He was wearing a big woman's mink coat. And then once he got scared and realized, oh, well, maybe I can just blame this on a monster, he ran over. He found another car about 4 or 5 blocks away and jumped in front of that so they would see it, and then was just always afraid to tell anybody about it.
Wow. It makes you wonder how many other situations where people have reported monsters like that have a more of a mundane explanation.
But it, like I said earlier, what's interesting is, if you look at that Monroe monster account, there's those 2 reports, and then 1,000 people walk through the forest trying to find this monster, and within a few weeks there are more monsters in Michigan. People are starting to see them, on the other side near Kalamazoo and near the border of Michigan and Indiana. And, it's if the first one was just a guy in a woman's fur coat, what were the other 6 or 7 that got seen within the next 2 weeks? It's almost as if, when we talk about strangeness, when we talk about things like thought forms and egregores, like, did enough people start thinking about it to actually push something into reality?
Well, that's almost like Sheldrake's morphic field types of theory. You get enough people thinking along those same lines, and it becomes a reality almost, for a while at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, Steve, go ahead.
And John Keel's transmogrification of energy. Mm-hmm. He used the term ultra-terrestrial as a literary device, because I don't think he really knew what it was. But he believed that the reality of the UFO were the soft sightings, the lights, the mysterious lights, and that the manifestation wasn't important. It wasn't important if you saw a hairy biped walk off into the woods or a giant UFO overhead. That, first you'd see the flash of light. It would be kind of a programming kind of a thing. And then that's why some people would see a UFO and somebody standing right next to him wouldn't see it, because certain people are kind of tuned to this. But again, I love the word transmogrification. But, a lot of times when we talk about things like this, what John just brought up, it kind of brings me back to Keel, and I wonder if some of this isn't true. I don't think it explains everything, because it does seem like we are dealing with some other intelligence. But yeah, it's very and again, the Slender Man stuff that Nick Redfern has written about, where it seemed to be an internet hoax that has taken on a life of its own.
Well, okay, John, going along those lines, do you want to tell us the story about the old man and the elf, or elves? that
it's just one.
That you had an experience with as well.
Yeah. So it was about 2 years ago now. A gentleman came to one of my lectures, saw me, found out about me, and wanted to know if I wanted to see an elf. And whenever anybody asks me if I want to do something weird, if it's safe, then I say yes, because I want to experience the vast weirdness of what seems to be reality. And so he gave me a huge list of things I had to do to prepare myself to see this elf, or what he was calling an elf. So I had to 3 times a day for 3 days, I had to touch and talk to a non-human. So like a dog or a cat or a bird or just an animal of some sort. I couldn't I couldn't eat anything that had any animal products in it. I had to pay attention for 3 days of every time I turned right, and at the end of the day, I would turn 3 times left for every time I turned right. So it was just all of this weird stuff he had me do, and then he invited me up to his home in the Thumb area of Michigan, which backs up to a state forest. We walked out there in the snow. It's about 9:30 at night, and he has me breathing with my mouth open, because he tells me that these things in the forest, this elf, can smell that I haven't eaten meat, and so it won't be afraid of me. So I'm standing there with mouth agape, breathing, and it's about minus 10 degrees outside, standing in the snow in the dark, and I'm pretty sure at this point, in my mind, I'm thinking someone dressed up as the Keebler elf is going to jump out of the woods and stab me in the chest, and that'll be the end of John Tenney. But instead, what happens is I start to see what look like fireflies, except they are pink and blue, and they don't seem to be lighting and floating. They seem to be popping kind of in and out in the darkness. And I looked at him and got kind of nervous, and he said, "Oh, it's coming." And I had a camera. I asked if I could take a picture, and he said, "Yeah, whatever, just bring it." And so he pointed in front of me into the darkness, and he said, it's right there in front of you in the darkness. And so without even putting my camera up to my eye, I just kind of flashed the bulb on my camera, or the light on my camera. And when the flash went off, there was this thing standing on a log in front of me that was probably 11 to 12 inches tall, with it was covered completely in fur, had hooves, had a fat belly, little arms, big floppy ears, deep inset eyes, a flat nose that kind of ended in a cat mouth. And as soon as my flash went off, it jumped into the darkness. I ran toward it. I saw all these little, hoof prints in the snow, but the thing had vanished. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I think I just saw an elf. And so, your listeners know, and you guys know, you do this long enough, you always think you've seen the weirdest thing. And then one day the universe says, hold my beer, I'm going to show you something a lot weirder. And so the story goes far stranger and deeper than that. Eventually it's at my house, and I have pictures of the hoof prints on my front porch, and I was on Skype with some friends when it was kind of attacking the outside of my house and banging doors and slamming windows. And I still really don't have any idea of what it was, but what I do think was interesting is that the gentleman who introduced me to it, he said that he could speak to it telepathically. And when it spoke to him, it could only use the words in his mind to relay information. And when he asked it, "What are you?" the only word that it could find in his mind that it represented itself was the word whimsy. And so he calls it an elf, but what I talk about it with him and to other friends of mine when we talk about it at a much deeper kind of psychological level is that it seems to be this kind of representation of that ancient kind of trickster god, that whimsy that permeates our universe.
Very interesting. So did you, when you took the picture of it, did that picture come out or?
So I of course, like any good researcher, right, I am now 350 pages into a book, which has been done and is being proofed, and the photo is in there. And I just have to figure out a good time to release it because the publisher I'm working with originally wanted to release it in December. And I said, you're going to release a book about an elf before Christmas? And I didn't want that to happen. So then the next publishing date they give me was about 2 weeks before St. Patrick's Day. So I put the squash on that because I don't want an elf book coming out around the time of leprechauns. But I mean, eventually it will come out with the entirety of the story. I mean, I had to put a new roof on my house. This thing actually was, I would wake up in the morning and shingles would be on my front and back lawn because it was trying to get into my house. It's a very bizarre, which is why I like being on this show, bizarre story.
So it followed you home basically, which is and it, as you well know, since you have been on haunting investigations, that's one of the things that people are often warned when they go on ghost hunts or investigations is to not to invite the ghost to come home with you because oftentimes they will.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things I had to do was I had to figure, okay, so I've had to replace my roof. I had to fix it broke the glass out of my front screen door. And I thought to myself, well, what can I? So I talked to a bunch of friends of mine who are all very familiar with all types of high strangeness. And one of them, her name's Dana, her and her husband Greg run a traveling museum of the paranormal and the occult. And Dana said, what you have to do? You have to just invite it into your house and give it a room where it can stay. Give it just a space, and it'll be happy that it's in your house. So I went through this whole kind of I made myself a ritual to do, and I opened up the door and said to the universe, you can come in the house, but you have to stay in this corner. And I kind of gave this traditional kind of fairy elf offering of a bowl of milk and oatmeal and said, this is your corner, you can stay there. And as soon as I did that, all of these events that were happening around my house just ceased to happen. But the entire time that it was quote unquote living here, I was immersed, buried and drowning in synchronicities.
You're a braver man than I would. I never would have invited it. I never would have. Now, leaving the, like the bowl of milk or some porridge out on the doorstep for it, that, I'd be willing to do that, but to invite it into my home, I'm not sure.
Can I just add a little bit to that? I think it was last year at the Michigan Paracon when John Tenney was up on stage telling this very story. My wife, who is a bit sensitive, said she saw, how you got the drapes, the curtain behind you, and at the very top you have that kind of decorative piece at the top. Well, she saw what she thought was kind of a little bump moving along the very top of that very slowly while John is telling his story.
And what's also strange about that, Steve, is at that Paracon that you're talking about, there are a number of pictures of me doing that lecture on stage, and there are very odd lens flares, all very low near my knees, in almost every picture of me at that event.
I'm not surprised.
So now, while all this was going on with you, John, did you happen to have any UFO sightings?
I didn't have any UFO sightings, but like I said, the synchronicities were extremely weird. So, about a week later, I was going to an event and I pulled up in a parking lot and there was no place to park and I was getting frustrated. And so I kind of said, I just need a place to park. I put that kind of intention out there. And so as soon as I had put that intention out, a car backed out and I was like, good. So I pulled and I parked, and then the car next to me backed out, and then there was another parking space, and then there was another parking space, and then there were 4 parking spaces. And then a giant truck came and pulled up in those 4 empty parking spaces. And it was for Ed's Lumber and Furniture. And the reason I remember the name is because it was abbreviated on the back of the truck. And so I looked over, and the back of this truck says ELF on it in huge letters. And I was like, okay, I get it. You're the one. Yeah, I get it. You're the one who gave me the parking spots. Thanks a lot.
Well, I got one up on that story. Back a couple of years ago, I was visiting with a friend of mine in Tucson by the name of Alan Benz, who used to be the librarian for the old Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, the group APRO run by Jim and Coral Lorenzen. Yep. And we spent a Friday afternoon into the evening discussing the history of APRO and how Mr. Benz had been involved in the opening of the Close Encounters movie. He had been called by the production company to give him some information and case histories and so forth and so on. So I was very pleased with my interview, and then I got into my friend's vehicle, Charlotte, who lives there in Tucson, and we drove down to Sedona. Now, we didn't even tell anybody where we were going. Well, we pulled into the Coffee Pot, which is a very famous place where everybody stops and has coffee, and you can choose from 103 different kinds of omelets, which is a lot of omelets. I mean, when you get down to the bottom, down to the bottom of the menu, it's like pineapple and peanut butter. Now, but some people must like it, or it wouldn't be on the menu, Anyway, so we eat and we have our brunch and a Bloody Mary and all, and we walk out into the parking lot, and we go to get into my friend's vehicle, and parked in the parking slot right next to us is a car. And the license plate says APRO on it, APRO. Well, APRO hasn't existed in several decades. Nobody knew that we were going down there. And even if they did, why would they be in the slot next to ours in the Coffee Pot parking lot? I mean, it's so bizarre. If you go, oh, you made it up. No, look on the internet. There's a photograph of us pointing to the license plate. APRO. Crazy. I mean, how is that? Well, I did a whole 450-page book on synchronicities. The stuff that happens to me is so wild that it's got to be pre-programmed, man. I do believe, like Philip K. Dick, that we are living in a computerized matrix. I mean, somebody like Charles Ford, I mean, and John Keel believed this, I guess, to some degree, that we're pieces on a chessboard, and somebody is moving us around. Now, the question is, are they moving us around deliberately and preordaining our destiny, or is it just a random, sampling? I kind of think that perhaps they came here, like millions of years ago, implanted computers or something in the earth, or maybe on the moon's surface or something, and then maybe they check back every 100,000 years, and everything is on automatic pilot. So what happens to you?
Let me tie in synchronicities with your synchronicity with my synchronicity, which is I was looking while you were talking, and the day after I confirmed doing this radio show, I uploaded to my website every single APRO bulletin so that people can download them for free.
Yeah. A good. We quote from that quite a bit. In fact, we have a book that we just came out with called. I'm semi-retired. I only do 3 or 4 new books a month. But we have UFO hostilities, and there's some quite really good cases there that APRO South American representative Dr. Fontes was involved in investigating.
All right, we need to go to our break here, Tim, so we'll be right back with more Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with 2 of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the final segment of Exploring the Bizarre. Tim, it just seems like that we have so much fun doing this show, and then all of a sudden here we are in the last less than 30 minutes of the program.
If we got donations, we might do it every night. Hint, hint.
Boy, I don't know if my wife would like that.
Not only that, you need to be like a Coast to Coast or something where you have 3 producers. That's you need an office staff.
There you go. Yeah,
and we're the office staff.
Yeah, I started to say we're our own office staff.
So do push that donation button there.
Repeatedly, push it repeatedly, time and again. All right. Okay, well,
let's swing ahead.
Yeah. Okay, John, Steve. Now, you mentioned during the break that you're both going to be at an upcoming conference. You say in Michigan?
Yes,
take it, Steve.
Okay, Houghton Lake, Michigan. I guess Houghton Lake's about 2/3 of the way up in the Lower Peninsula.
Yep.
A beautiful resort area, and we're going to be staying at the Houghton Lake Resort. And great list of speakers. Let's see, Nick Redfern. You've heard of him before, and of course John Tenney and I. Andrea Perron, right? Who's I think a good friend of John's. He may want to say more about her.
She was one of the daughters from the movie The Conjuring. She was one of the daughters that lived in that house that movie was based on.
And a great lady. I've seen Andrea was with you a couple of years ago speaking, right? Yep. And those guys are great together. Bill Konkoleski, who I think's been on your show, Tim and Tim. He's the head of Michigan MUFON. Another great guy. I attend the Michigan MUFON meetings when I can. Erica Lukes, another great UFO researcher and podcaster, and I think I covered everybody. John,
right? That's you nailed them all.
Okay, so and Deb and RJ DeRoos, did I pronounce her last name correctly? I hope. They're a great couple. I got to meet them at the Michigan Paracon, and this is they wanted to put this together in Michigan because there really hasn't been much in the way of UFO conferences in Michigan. And so I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be great to be on stage with some really great people. So
yeah, that's on the September 22nd.
Yes, September 22nd. And if you bought your ticket early, you can come and see the celebrities. That's funny. I'm a celebrity on Friday night. So I'm going to try and act like a celebrity on Friday.
Steve, one of the last times that we had you on our show was before all of the activity started in Chicago, with the people seeing winged weirdos. And have you been following that, Eddie? I mean, Chicago's not that far.
There's been a lot of controversy on it, and I haven't been following it too much. This Allison Jornlin and actually Kim Poppy, especially Allison, they've gone to a lot of the. I think they went to every single site where these things are supposed to have taken place. A lot of these reports are anonymous, so you can't really get to the person that reported it to ask more questions. But it seems to be, from what I can tell, kind of a mixed bag. There are some events that seem like they are legitimate. There are others where when Allison's gone there and they look at the way the report went down and they're looking at what the weather conditions were supposed to be and just the logistics, they're not always working out. So now I also heard a rumor that some of the original reports that came into the police station were via email and came from the same IP address, like supposedly different sightings. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but what I wonder is if the same thing's repeating. Even if some of these were hoaxes, I'm wondering if something was triggered and some of these things aren't actually at least apparitions or some kind of temporal expression or manifestation of these things. So I'm not the expert on it, but I intend to actually, I'll be with Allison at the Mothman Festival, and she's also going to be speaking at the Van Meter Visitor Festival. So I'm running with some pretty interesting people over and over again at some of these conferences. So she would actually be a great person to have on the show to talk about that.
Oh, definitely. You'll need to send me information about her. We'll see if we can get her on.
I'll do that for the Van Meter guys too, because they're both really excellent researchers.
Well, what do you think it is? Okay, throughout it seems like the history of the weird, we have this kind of a continuation almost of people seeing these really bizarre winged creatures. So I mean, what's going on with that? Tell me, give me a good definitive explanation of what's going on there, Steve.
Okay. No problem. You should have started out with the easy questions right away. Right?
Yeah. Well, we saved the hard stuff for the last segment.
I was just looking today at a book of folklore in the West Virginia area. There was another a rash of sightings right around World War I, where they were seeing these large winged creatures with about a 10 or 12 foot wingspan that appeared to have human heads. And supposedly they were, people were keeping their children indoors because they were afraid of these things. And it was right along the Kanawha River, which empties into the Ohio. That's the, the confluence of the two rivers. Right. And remember Mary Heyer, who allied herself with John Keel, the reporter, the beloved reporter in the area, wrote that column, Where the Waters Mingle. All this stuff comes together. And sometimes it seems to be connected with the confluence of rivers. When it there's so many of these things. The thing is, when I get a little bit I don't know, miffed when people say, the Mothman in Chicago or whatever, they're not all the same. Whatever's going on, these manifestations or apparitions or whatever, they're not identical to what the Mothman was. Mm-hmm. Although even there in the Mothman era, there were some different reports that didn't quite mesh up, although about 100 of them did. Okay, it's easier for me to tell you what the Mothman probably wasn't than what he actually was. And it gets really confusing. But, when we go back to the original reports about 7 foot tall, 10 foot wingspan, the biology doesn't work out. Probably the wingspan isn't big enough to lift something that big. The wings didn't always flap. Sometimes they would open up. This thing would take off straight up like a helicopter. The eye glow wasn't eye glow. It seemed like it was actually generating these red eyes. Some people got a real close look at it. To really throw a wrench in it, I think it was a Mrs. Thomas in the TNT area. One of the last sightings saw this thing, this big, tall, gray thing walking through the TNT area, and it was walking very fast, almost like a robot. I listened to one of these obscure John Keel lectures on Audible, on an Audible clip, where some of the early reports he got people that got close to this could hear some kind of a humming noise or something like an engine. So you get all this contradictory stuff. I've spoken to about 6 or 7 of the original witnesses. One lady firmly believes it's a manifestation of evil. It manifested in their bedroom the same time that all this took place. Let's see, I talked to Tom Urey, who actually saw more like a thunderbird. He did not see the Mothman. In fact, he thought that these other witnesses like Linda Scarberry and so forth, he thought that they were saying the same thing he did. But what happened was when they were doing the film in 2002, Tom Urey and some of them went to the some kind of special that we're filming there. And he asked Marcella Bennett. Marcella Bennett's the one where she went out in the TNT area and this thing, she was holding her infant child and this thing rose up from the ground, this big gray thing. And she was so flustered, she actually fell on her baby. The baby was okay, but she was just terrified. They ran into the house and this thing walked back and forth on the porch. So Tom Urey said, okay, you tell me your story, I'll tell you mine. So Tom Urey told me, he said, we must have seen different things. At first he thought people saw what he did, but they imagined something much, much worse or something, much different than they actually saw because it was so frightening. So that didn't answer your question. People would say, well, it was some kind of mutation because of the TNT area was such a polluted area at one time. Well, I think that only happens in 1950s Roger Corman movies. I don't think that would happen. It acted more in some ways like an apparition, but in other ways, Keel found strange footprints by the old power plant. You know what else he found? The stories about the Dogman, this upright canid. He found these large dog-like footprints. And he consulted with Ivan Sanderson. Ivan Sanderson said, yeah, these things keep showing up in these paranormal hotspots. Linda Godfrey says the same thing. And I talked to Dr. Chuck Lietzow of Michigan MUFON, who's been studying Bigfoot and UFOs in Michigan. And he said the same thing. You have 4 researchers separated by half a century, all telling us that these large dog-like footprints are showing up in these paranormal hotspots. What does that tell us about the Dogman? So I just don't know. I don't know what it was, but over 100 people initially saw this thing. Other people came forward. There was definitely something going on, but you wonder how, just how physical. If there was a third party looking at some of these incidents from a distance, would they have seen the same thing, or would they have seen anything?
Well, it is almost like these winged creatures are, they're like an archetype almost, somewhere
Yes.
deeply buried within our, collective consciousness, and that for whatever reason, they take flight.
Well, they have the Wisconsin man bat. You had that one that looked a lot like the Mothman in Kent, England, almost exactly 3 years before the Mothman. These kids saw some kind of a craft land, and this thing got out kind of shuffling with wings and seemed to be kind of headless. You have the Owl Man of Cornwall. I do wonder if Mothman might have been a harbinger, neither good nor evil, but something that bubbles up in human consciousness when there's a disaster to come. I really don't know, but it's really fascinating to hear the people that saw this thing tell their story.
Well, and John, now, earlier you had talked about how, things like this. Trying to think of a proper way to put it. Well, it's just kind of like what Steve was saying there is that they seem to transmorgify. Is that what you're saying, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay.
Transmogrify.
That's it. Right. Yeah.
I think,
and that sounds like a term from an old Roger Corman movie.
Well, you know what? I think Kelvin from Kelvin and Hobbes resurrected that.
There you go. That's
transmogrification blaster
sure.
or something. Yeah.
That's right. So, but John, now you've investigated hauntings and even had a a show that you were involved with. So, and I know that the common consensus with all this is that everyone's dealing with your deceased grandma or Uncle Fred who died 5 years ago and is still
Right.
living in the bedroom or haunting the bedroom closet, but the association with a lot of these places, there's more than just hauntings, as I know that you have found out. I mean, there are other things. A lot of the witnesses also see some of these bizarre creatures or UFOs or things like that. So, have you often wondered that this the hauntings and other related phenomena, that it's maybe something completely different than we're currently thinking?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I have started to speak about more often, because it's where my brain is going, is it very much seems like, whether you're talking about ghosts or UFOs or cryptids, Mothman, Braxton County monsters, Van Meter monsters, whenever you're talking about anything, over the past, few decades, as I've gone to these places and talked to people and investigated cases and gotten to know more people, it seems to me that the universe is playing a game with us. And the only thing the cosmos has ever really showed us is that it loves to create. It makes things, then it destroys them, it rebuilds them, and it's in this constant process of doing things. And it seems almost like a play. It seems like it's a game. And when you make the decision to play against it, it puts a new move in front of you. So the universe, there are people, we call them cynics.
Very interesting. Yeah, sure. That you put it very. That's a fascinating way to put it. And if you don't play, you get no response.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you have cynics and skeptics and the universe taps them on the shoulder and says, do you want to play? And they say no. And so it doesn't play. But, a year later or some other time later, it'll tap them again and say, do you want to play? And they say no. And so it doesn't play with them. With people like us, every now and then it taps and says, do you want to play? And so we play. And then it gives us something to think about. Now, what's interesting to me is it seems like, I don't believe that we're the only thing in the universe. And so I do think that there are probably people who are also playing this game, or beings that are also playing this game, and they are probably better at it than we are. And so not only are we playing a game against the cosmic mind, there are other players involved who are also playing, that are being intertwined in our lives.
Now that's an interesting concept. I had never thought about that before. That there could be alternative players,
sure,
involved in all of this with us. That Tim, that's somewhat similar to what Paulino talks about.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah. Well, we are in some sort of cosmic. Back and
cosmic
forth.
Video game.
Well, that's like I say. Maybe the teenagers come home into the spaceship, like at 4:00 every afternoon, and decide to sit at the computerized playing Nintendo or something like that. And or maybe they do it once every 100,000 years, and they reprogram the computer. What story I like, Tim, if you remember, Ted Phillips talks about this creature or this device down in the cave that he's wanted to get to for years.
Right, the moon, the moon shaft area.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a fascinating. There could be places like that. Although, well, John Keel talked about the Eighth Tower. There were supposed to be these towers. In the earth around the planet that are sending us some sort of maybe waves or something that's kind of enabling these beings to play this game. Kind of kind of setting us up for it.
It's.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think it's just interesting because when at least when I apply this idea of a game, like I start to, it seems to me like I start to understand, which is weird because then that means that as soon as you understand, right, it's going to checkmate you and give you another move that you don't understand. But when I think about it in the terms of a game, it's like, so if you look at the airship wave of the 1890s, it's like, okay, I'm going to give you airships. And so we make airships. And then the next move it gives us is, okay, I'm going to give you something that's not airships. And then we make something that's not airships. It gives us the next step. And you can even apply this game as to the occult and magic, right? So you have people who are playing the game. You have people who are drawing strange sigils and doing strange incantations, and the universe says, oh, you're going to play this way, so I'm going to play back by giving you this thing. I'm going to give you a manifestation of good or bad or wealth or luck or whatever you want to call it. But it really, the more I think about it and the more that I look at my life and how my life has evolved in the lives of my friends, it seems like when you engage, this cosmic game plays back.
And there are repeats. When you talked about the majestic airships that went over in 1897 in Ohio, it made kind of a circuit around Ohio, I think mid-April to mid-May. Well, they were also seeing a Bigfoot-like creature near the Serpent Mound. And they were also seeing a large cat-like creature. So you had a high strangeness area, a window area going on 100 years ago. And these things have been repeated.
Very interesting. Well, and and that was something that John Keel talked about, was that just when you thought you maybe had your finger on what was going on, that it would go and change. and then you were back to square one again.
And if you had a certain frame of reference, he said belief was the enemy. Look out, because the manifestations will shape around your belief and give you what you want.
Absolutely. I mean, a belief, beliefs, I say this at my lectures a lot, belief, having a belief in something is wearing concrete shoes. Ideas are flexible. They mold and bend and grow. And a belief is just, something rigid that gets you stuck in the past. And again, the only thing the universe has ever shown us is that it loves to change. And so, when you try and stagnate, the entire force of the cosmos is going to come against you.
Well, we don't like to change, but we're approaching the midnight hour here, Tim. I mean, it's like coming up real fast on us, and I think we ought to go around the KCOR Exploring the Bizarre table one last time to let our guests tell us what they're doing. I mean, the most recent thing is that they got coming up so that our listeners can veer off to the website after the show and do some further research on our two very excellent guests this evening. It has been a pleasure. John, why don't we start out with you?
Sure. I've tried to make it as easy as possible for people to find me online. That it's just, if they just Google search John E.L. Tenney, and it should take you to my website, which is weirdlectures.com, and my Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. Or you can just type my last name, Tenney, Tenney, and weirdo after it, and that should lead you down some rabbit holes as well.
And Steve, what about you? When's the Mothman Festival taking place?
Third weekend in September. The UFO Contact is the fourth weekend in September, and the Van Meter Visitor Festival is the last weekend in September. I'm becoming involved with a Roads Beyond the Known YouTube channel, where we're going to be be debuting in September, in the fall. You can hear me weekly on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files, and also I have a chapter in a book you may have heard of called Weird Winged Wonders, talking about, no surprise, the Mothman and the Mothman Festival.
I think that book sounds familiar.
I think a couple of Tims had contributions in there as well.
Hey, I gotta throw in a plug. We have just finished Screwed by the Aliens. I believe this is the last PDF version of the book. It's 322 pages. And our graphics guy, I think he's about ready to go crazy with it, and I can't blame him. But it's done and over with, and should be on sale in a couple of days, and you all have to order a copy. Except for our guest tonight, we'll share a copy with them. We'll swap books, So,
Sounds
hey,
good.
I don't know. We've got some great guests coming up. We've got Calvin Parker and Jerry Clark coming on. Is that next week, Tim?
Yes, that's next week.
Oh, yeah, because, Calvin Parker crossed Pascagoula. I've got some inside information on that nobody else knows about. I'm going to ask Calvin. And anyway, good night to everybody. I want to say thank you again to our guests, and to Tim Swartz, and to Tina, and to Peter, and to Helen, and Carol, and Bill, and everybody else that is associated with us. And good night, one and all.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Explore Bizarre.